He thought surrender meant survival, but inside the Japanese prison camps, the real war was just beginning. And in that place where mercy did not exist, every breath became a battle of its own. The sun had barely risen over the burning forests of Bataan when Private Daniel Harris realized that the war he had known was nothing compared to the war that was about to begin inside him. His uniform was torn, his boots coated with dust, and his throat dry enough to crack. The air was thick with defeat, thousands of American and Filipino soldiers standing with their hands raised, waiting under the unblinking eyes of the Japanese troops. Daniel had survived days of retreat, hunger, and gunfire, but surrender was something he never imagined. And the silence that followed, the eerie, unnatural silence, felt heavier than any bullet. A Japanese officer paced slowly before the prisoners, his footsteps crisp against the road. His face showed no anger, no triumph, only a cold certainty, as if everything he saw already belonged to him. Daniel felt dread crawling through his chest when the officer stopped near a soldier who had collapsed. The officer didn't speak. He didn't hesitate. He lifted his sword, and in one clean motion, ended the man's struggle. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, but even darkness felt unsafe now. The order to march came sharply. Daniel stepped forward with thousands of others, feeling his legs tremble beneath him. The road ahead seemed endless, a long scar cutting through jungle and heat and death. They called it a march, but it wasn't. It was a test of how much pain a human could endure before his body surrendered forever. Hours slipped into one another. Men stumbled, fell, were beaten, stabbed, or shot for slowing down. The guards moved with a chilling indifference, as if death was simply part of the routine. Daniel kept his eyes on the back of the man ahead of him, forcing his legs to move in rhythm. Every breath felt like sand in his lungs. His vision blurred from thirst. His tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. Sergeant Cole marched beside him, the veteran's usually steady steps now faltering. Sweat ran down his face in thick lines, his jaw tight with pain. Daniel wanted to speak, to offer hope, but hope felt like a dangerous thing to share here. Still, he whispered softly, "We're going to make it." Cole didn't respond at first. Then, in a low voice, he muttered, "Just keep walking, kid. Don't stop. Not for anything." The sun burned overhead, turning the road into a furnace. The prisoners' shadows shrank until they disappeared. Men began hallucinating, some reached for streams that weren't there, others collapsed calling out for mothers, wives, children. Daniel's feet felt like stones. His heartbeat echoed in his ears. But stopping meant dying. And he wasn't ready to die on this road. By the second day, Daniel felt his mind slipping. He walked half asleep, half conscious. A guard struck him on the shoulder with a rifle, but when he slowed, the pain sharp enough to drag him back into reality. He stumbled but stayed upright. If he fell, he knew he wouldn't rise again. The march stretched on for days. When they finally reached the first makeshift holding camp, Daniel collapsed beside Sergeant Cole. The ground was hot, but it felt like a blessing. They weren't given food. Barely any water. Men fought for drops. Others simply stared blankly at nothing. Daniel watched a group of prisoners gather around a small puddle formed by a leaking pipe. They dipped their hands into the muddy water, desperate for even a taste. A guard approached, and without warning, he forced one man's head into the puddle until the struggling stopped. The others backed away in terror. Daniel felt something break inside him. This wasn't war. This was hell. When the march finally ended after nearly a week, Daniel had lost track of time. He had walked through heat, rain, darkness, and nightmares. He had seen men he knew die in ways he could never forget. His mind felt heavier than his body. His hope had shrunk to a thin thread. But he was alive. Barely. The prisoners were jammed into boxcars, dark, airless, suffocating. Bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, sweat mixing with blood. Some fainted, others suffocated. Daniel fought for air, lifting his chin toward the tiny slits of light above. Every breath was a victory. Every minute felt like hours. When the doors creaked open, the prisoners spilled out like corpses brought to life. Daniel fell to his knees, gasping. The guards herded them forward toward the prison camp, Camp O'Donnell. But Daniel didn't know the name. He only knew the smell. Rot. Decay. Death. The camp was filled beyond capacity. Men lay on the ground, skin stretched over bone, eyes hollow. Flies covered their wounds like living shadows. Disease moved through the camp faster than bullets. Daniel and Cole found a corner of a bamboo hut to collapse into. The walls rattled in the wind. The floor was damp. The air carried the stench of death. Cole whispered, "Stay close. Don't get sick. And whatever happens, keep your mind alive." Daniel nodded, but it was easier said than done. The days blurred. Prisoners were given watery rice or sometimes nothing. Men died in their sleep, their bodies dragged away by others who were buried alive. Daniel worked in the burial detail 1 week, a task that left him numb. The bodies were so light, as if the soul left with the flesh. He remembered one man clutching a photo of his wife even in death. Daniel felt tears burn his eyes, but he forced them back. Tears wasted energy. In the camp, hope was dangerous. But something strange happened. Daniel began to notice patterns. The guards were strict, cruel, unpredictable. But one guard, a young Japanese soldier named Tanaka, seemed different. He rarely spoke. Rarely hit anyone. Once, when Daniel collapsed from fever, Tanaka tossed him a small canteen of water when no one was looking. It saved his life. But kindness here came with risk. One day, Daniel saw Tanaka beaten by another guard for hesitating to strike a prisoner. Daniel watched, helpless, as Tanaka fell to the ground. The guard kicked him repeatedly. The message was clear: mercy had no place here. The weeks turned into months. Daniel watched men lose their minds, lose their names, lose themselves. But he held on. Because he remembered something his mother told him when he left home. Daniel, no matter where you go, always come back. Come back to yourself. He repeated those words often. They grounded him. One night, a storm lashed the camp. Rain poured in sheets. Wind howled. Daniel felt fever creeping in, his body cold and burning at the same time. Cole sat beside him, whispering, "Don't you die on me, kid." Not here. But Daniel slipped into darkness. He awoke days later on a wooden platform near the infirmary. His vision blurry, his throat burning. A Filipino doctor working secretly among prisoners looked at him. "You're alive," he murmured. "But barely." Daniel whispered, "Why help me?" The doctor smiled faintly. "Because not helping you would make me less human." Moments like that, small sparks of humanity, kept Daniel alive. But the camp was changing. Guards grew more brutal. Food rations shrank. Disease spread like wildfire. One morning, Daniel watched as a man tried to escape, weak, starving, but desperate. He didn't make it far. The guards brought his body back, displaying it as a warning. Daniel felt rage burning inside him, but he swallowed it. Rage got you killed. Then something happened that shifted everything. A rumor spread: a rescue mission. A daring raid by American forces on another camp. Prisoners whispered about shadows in the night, gunfire in the distance, Japanese guards panicking. Daniel overheard pieces of conversation about a place called Cabanatuan, where a group of Rangers and Filipino guerrillas had freed hundreds of POWs in a lightning-fast assault. Hope flickered. But hope also brought fear. Guards grew suspicious. Punishments became harsher. Prisoners were forced to dig trenches, build defenses. Daniel sensed something. The Japanese feared the Americans were closer than they admitted. One evening, Daniel sat with Cole, watching the sunset bleed into the sky. Cole's voice was weak. "If they come, don't hesitate. Run. Don't look back." Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll get out together." Cole shook his head slowly. "If I don't make it, you tell them what happened here. Promise me." Daniel hesitated, then whispered, "I promise." 2 nights later, tragedy struck. Cole collapsed during work detail, his body too weak to continue. A guard approached, raising his rifle. Daniel threw himself in front of Cole, shouting, "No!" A blow struck Daniel's face, knocking him to the ground. Cole looked at him with fading eyes and whispered, "Don't waste your life." The guard lifted his weapon again. Daniel closed his eyes, but the shot never came. Tanaka stepped between them, shouting something to the guard. A tense argument followed. The guard lowered his rifle reluctantly and walked away. Tanaka knelt beside Cole. But it was too late. The sergeant took one last breath, his hand brushing Daniel's arm, then fell still. Daniel felt something inside him shatter. Cole had been his anchor, his strength. Now he was gone. The promise he made echoed endlessly in his mind. In the following days, Daniel's grief hardened into determination. He watched the guards, studied their patterns, memorized shifts, routes, blind spots. Not because he planned to escape was suicide, but because he needed to know everything in order to survive. The Americans were coming. He could feel it. Then, one night, the jungle erupted with distant gunfire. Flares lit the sky. Explosions rumbled like thunder. Shouts echoed through the camp. Guards scrambled in panic. Daniel's heart soared. They were close. They were here. The prisoners huddled, waiting. Minutes felt like hours. Then the gate blew open in a burst of fire and smoke. American Rangers stormed in, shouting for prisoners to stay low. Gunfire cracked through the night. Daniel stumbled to his feet, his body trembling with adrenaline. A ranger grabbed his arm, pulling him to safety. "You're going home, buddy," he shouted. Daniel looked back at the camp one last time, a place that had taken everything and everyone he cared about. He whispered, "I kept my promise, Cole. I survived." As he was led into the darkness of the jungle, away from the nightmare that had consumed a year of his life, Daniel felt something strange, a feeling he hadn't known since the war began. It was hope. Real, warm, living hope. When Daniel finally returned home months later, his body thin and scarred, he struggled to put his story into words. But he remembered his promise. He spoke of the march, the camps, the deaths, the cruelty, the small acts of kindness, the moments of humanity that shined in the darkest places. He testified. He wrote. He told the world what happened. And because of men like him, the forgotten prisoners were forgotten no more.